this is her reading the Bible. Reading the word wine in print gives her a taste for it. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine. She doesn't pause to question what an erotic letter is doing in the Old Testament. Maybe King James had mojo, she thinks. She returns to the book with a glass of cheap Sauvignon Blanc and fans through the pages like she's seen her daughter Gail do many times. Now understanding why. Because a book like this has no starting point and no end. Reading it sequentially feels like a waste of time. She's too quickly buried in a sea of names and evocations, many of which she recognizes only from Christmas songs or art books. She'd prefer to treat the Bible like a polite picnic, to get a flavor of each book but not to indulge. She picks Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon as her favorites because they appear to have the least to do with religion. Ecclesiastes appears downright nihilistic. There's something intriguing about Revelation, but she doesn't feel equipped to understand it. Maybe she thinks she could bring it up with Bill and Elizabeth, a conversation starter. At sunset, she lands on the Book of Ruth, which she always knew existed but has never read. Despite the story being rather boring compared to the Song of Solomon, she's amused to read about her nominal ancestor. The biblical Ruth lived in another universe. She was a simple, mundane, and family-oriented woman, devoted to her mother-in-law, even long after her husband died. And she worked in the fields with her hands. She was poor, virtuous, and never took more than was given. It's hard to get a feeling for the biblical Ruth, what she dreamed of, or what she felt. The language of the King James Bible is too distant. Grammatically, it's rife with mistakes, and with its highfalutin, ever-condescending tone, it was surely written by a man who had no place describing the inner lives of women anyway. But she wants to know what Ruth looked like, if she had good posture, if her face resembled her own at all. She goes to her husband's library and searches for a book of religious portraits. Under art and miscellaneous, she finds a tall book called Romanticism and Religion, which is full of 18th and 19th century oil paintings. She fans through the glossy pages until she finds what she's looking for. The biblical Ruth as imagined by some Italian painter named Francesco Hayez some 140 years ago. She is standing in the center of a vertical, rectangular frame before a soft brown and yellow countryside. For some reason, her tunic has fallen from her shoulders, leaving her naked from the belly button up, even though her bottom half is wrapped in two separate robes. She wears a gold band around her right forearm and holds it out for examination. A bushel of wheat is tucked in her left elbow, and her hair is wrapped. She gazes at something to the left of the viewer. Ruth is drawn to the shadows, the hue of them, the loam-colored shadows that encircle her eyes and dissolve as they approach the edge of her oval chin. No, she thinks, her posture is not very good. She is hunched a little to the right and her head is nowhere near straight on her shoulders. In fact, she looks more like her daughter Gail, with a bad knee and her eyes always on the distance. The image is intriguing because it's ripe with mysteries. Why is she topless? Was that the norm amongst Moabite women? It's common enough amongst the religious subjects of 19th century artists. Topless Bathsheba, topless Mary Magdalene, topless Delilah, topless Eve, topless Lot's wife, the whole gang. On the next page is the same painting, almost identical, except that Ruth's tunic has climbed partway up her shoulders, covering her breasts at least. In the second version, the trees in the background are a little more distinct, but the face is less defined, as though these two elements cannot fully coexist. This is several months later. She's working on a portrait that was commissioned by her friends. What does the world need of us? She asks the empty parlor, her husband's ghost. He can't answer and she can't imagine how he would respond. Instead, Bill and Elizabeth stare at her from the canvas. Near the highlight on Bill's retina is a minuscule convex blur that could be her, the artist, l'artiste. That's what I would have been called if I was featured in one of those books, she says to herself, alongside Matisse or Hayez. She's been there in his retina for months now, since Bill commissioned the painting. Now it's October. He must be wondering when it will be done, she thinks. In the back of her mind, she's already given up on producing the portrait he wanted, something simple to give his nieces to remember him by. No, the painting is more hers now than his, is her closest companion these days. This year, like most years, Winter comes with a prelude. By noon, the snow has almost all melted, aside from the deposits under parked vehicles and in the shadows of buildings. Ruth packs her painting pad, brushes, and a selection of hand-mixed paints adapted from the Winsor & Newton's nostalgic collection. The colors she wants, earthy, cadaver-esque, autumnal, and muted as though behind a thin fog, weren't in the catalog. She drives to Bill and Elizabeth's farm. It's Sunday. They're at church, so she has time. Before she finds a subject, she practices 10 minutes of strolling around meditation, trespassing meditation. She walks the perimeter of the house, eyes skirting the parallel lines of the cedar shakes. Then she branches to the pasture and leans against the fence, examining the muscular, picturesque, black and white cows and the alpaca that shares their quarters. The alpaca stands in the opposite corner from the herd, facing north. Then she turns to view a distant acre of corn. To her, the crop is a line, but to a bird, perhaps it would appear as a rhombus. There's a hill in the middle of the corn, an island with some coppered trees, and a border of mown around the perimeter of it, separating the crop from the adjoining wood and allowing one to walk around the corn, even to hide behind it. She decides to sketch the furrows in the grass that the tractor has left behind, which occasionally break the surface and reveal dirt. The lines undulate toward a distant shed. By 10 o'clock, she feels she's pushing her luck, so she packs up and jogs to the car. She returns several times over the course of October. She goes every Sunday without fail, but also the odd day in between. On those days, she parks her car on the long driveway, behind the trees and hidden from the house, and banks on nobody leaving or entering the property for the next couple hours. She gets the impression that they don't have much company other than herself. In case they're home, she wears dark clothing and treks through the forest to avoid being spotted. From the tree line, she can still get decent angles of the house and the shed. It's difficult to move through the woods with her pencils, pad, and paint box in tow, and by the end of it, she's covered in grime and needles. Being forced to inhabit the woods comes with the advantage of uncovering things such as abandoned wasp hives, bits of litter caught in trees, or the more intrepid autumn flowers. Her greatest find is an abandoned treehouse in the woods east of the house. It's the haunting kind of beautiful, the beauty of things children once loved but no longer do. Many loose boards hang by single nails. The planks are covered in at least 2 kinds of lichen, which alternate between whitish green and yellow. The tire swing contains an abandoned nest, and a child had long ago carved their names onto one of the support beams. Willie. She compiles dozens of pages of the house, the vehicles, the shed, the corn, the cows, and the alpaca. This done, she attempts to draft a list of beauties in her head, a list of things that can add credence to what she's collected on the page, things she can point to and say when somebody asks, "This is what artists are doing. They are finding beauty where no one else can, things the modern world no longer has a place for or ever did." To stand in these forgotten parts and extract their beauties, it's like setting a bucket below a waterfall and using it to fill a bathtub. Bill finds her one morning, poised on a stump behind the yet-to-be-hewn corn. "Ruth, what are you doing?" "I hope I didn't wake you," she says. "Of course you didn't." Lizzie just looked out the window and said, "Hey, Bill, I think there's someone out in the field." Well, I looked for myself and I saw you there and I thought, well, it's not a good idea to be walking around like that in the winter. "It's hardly winter yet," she says. "I'm just doing some studies." "I see. That's something artists say when they're digging around," she says. "Well, you better come in and warm up. There's still frost out here and you've got a fall jacket on by the look of it." "Give me 15, she says. She continues with her labor, but the paints she's mixed herself will not settle. Perhaps they're old, she thinks, watching oil seep up through clumps of pigment. But it's just a study. She aims to lay out the scene in blocks. The house, a childish house of squares and triangles. The trees, aflutter. A long, angled boar's hair brush set on its side and rolled across the pad in an inconsistent line will suffice as a stand-in for the universe of pale morning light moving between stalks of corn, which is the most complex element of this scene and could consume a month if she was so inclined. Now she's back at home. She's waiting for Bill to come and fix her washing machine. Her sink, sorry. Before he arrives, she spends a few minutes with the portrait in progress. Elizabeth and Bill side by side on the steps of their porch. His face is done much better than hers, much better. The lines are more confident, the lips like dips on the edge of a riverbank, the hair feathered like the down of a duck. To represent him, she had to repurpose the things she understood from the natural world to fit the human face. Now she uses a fat, filbert brush to feel the paint, to smudge, to blend the contours of the cheekbone and pull the shadow away from an invisible sun. She holds it side by side with Francisco Hayes' portrait of the biblical Ruth to compare. As she does, she notices another distinction between her and the biblical Ruth. It has to do with labor, not the quantity but the quality. Labor is distinct from work, she thinks, because the former carries an inherent hardship, whereas the latter does not necessarily. Labor is livelihood. One labors not for fulfillment or pleasure, but for life. Ruth labored to make herself at home in an alien environment. She labored until she met Boaz. Laboring in the sun is not the same as working in the sun, as one can work in the sun on a hobby garden. But laboring is what Bill does as a farmer. If he stops, he starves. But an artist, she thinks, if they are genuine, will also starve when they stop laboring. I'm going to introduce the next writer now. Doreen Vanderstoop, right here, is a Calgary-based writer, storyteller, and musician. Her short fiction has been published by Lost on 8th and Prairie Fire, and has appeared online at Montreal Surrey, Prairie Journal, Epiphany Magazine, and others. As a storyteller and musician, she intersperses songs among tales of all genres, including her own stories. Doreen performs for audiences of all ages at schools, libraries, festivals, conferences, and more, including bookstores. She leads workshops to ignite in others a passion for the power of story, oral and written. Watershed is her debut novel.
Thank you, Kevin, for that introduction. It's great to be here with both of you. I just want to make a couple of acknowledgements. First of all, this amazing bookstore that does so much to support artists of all kinds in this city. It's just the most amazing place, and it's wonderful to be here and to be associated with it in a couple of respects. I'm also a storyteller, and we do our programs here a lot, or we did at least before, in the before times. So yes. Just also want to acknowledge my publisher, FreeHand Books, and Kelsey Attard. Just amazing, the support that they've given to this novel, and I'm so grateful to that. So Watershed is a near-future dystopian novel that is about a family torn apart by the effects of catastrophic climate change. It follows two characters. One is Willa Van Bruggen, who owns a goat farm with her husband in southern Alberta near Fort Macleod, and her son, Daniel Brooks, who is a hydrogeologist and has gone to find a job with the company that's building a water pipeline to southern Alberta. There is no more water in Alberta. All the glaciers are gone. So it takes place in around the 2050s. So the first reading I'm going to do is from Willa's section, and I think it's self-explanatory. Willa and Calvin's farmhouse, made of hand-hewn spruce logs, stood stalwart against Alberta's unremitting gales. Her father had hauled the house up the hill when the glaciers began to melt in earnest and overflowed the banks of the Old Man River. He had never bothered with the expense of moving it back when the river receded and eventually dried up. Despite its travels, the house looked exactly as it had when Willa's grandparents built it, right down to the 1970s faded green Formica countertops and four-seater breakfast nook where Willa and Calvin now sat. Only the floor had been replaced with porcelain tiles that, as her father put it, would easily outlive him. The aromas of steeped tea and fresh baking hung in the air like false promises. They suggested a normalcy not reflected in the world beyond the walls of the house. The scent of pine wafted up from the lit candle in the center of the table, nudging distant memories at the corners of Willa's mind. The sappy smell of sun-warmed lodgepoles, thickly needled branches waving in the breeze. She watched her husband butter his biscuit, a sparing layer right to the outer edges. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. She coveted Calvin's blind optimism. 2 nights ago, as they lay side by side in bed staring up at the ceiling, he said, "All we need is each other and this patch of land, our heaven on earth." Where he saw heaven, she saw Armageddon. While he lived moment to moment, she imagined herself hunkered down by the picture window in the living room with a rifle cocked at an approaching squad car, refusing to leave the land she and her family had toiled over. "Calvin," she said, "we've got to talk about the loan. We've missed 2 payments now." "You worry too much, Willa." He scooped and spread honeyberry jam on a second biscuit, savoring a bite before he added, "We'll get Ian Mason to work something out for us. Extend the loan, reduce the payments. We're having a good breeding season. I've got that lead on selling 15 kids this month. We'll get back on our feet. Others are worse off than we are. God, these biscuits are good." Willa countered, "We already renegotiated the loan once. I think we should have a plan for if... Let's see what Ian says on Monday, love." Calvin placed his knife neatly beside his plate. "Now, I've got to get out there and disbud the new kids. Hope the milk truck shows up on time to drain the tank." With biscuit in hand, he kissed the top of her head and went outside. She heard him step into his rubber boots, whistling, "Don't fence me in." Calvin's steaming cup of tea sat untouched on the table. Only the tick-tock of the Dutch wall clock in the living room broke the silence in the house. Willa thought about the federal government's upcoming buyout program. Landowners in southern Alberta would have from July to December 2058 to cash in their land. 25% of its current assessed value, itself a fraction of land values a decade ago. She couldn't betray her father by selling his land for a pittance. Still, the word foreclosure reared in Willa's mind, bucking all other thoughts away. She tensed her stomach muscles to quell an eruption of sick dread. She anchored her hands on the edge of the table, fixated on her tea mug, with its picture of a bluebird resting in a twist of jade vines. Her headache, which had subsided, crept back in. As she watched, one of the vines became a snake. It writhed and wound its body around the delicate bird, squeezing. Willa swiped the mug away. Tea sprayed her leg and the floor. The cup smashed on the tiles. So the next reading is from Daniel's, one of Daniel's sections. Daniel Brooks gripped the railing as he crossed the Langevin Bridge toward downtown Calgary. A hefty west wind kicked dust around the dry Bow River riverbed. He passed through the castellated wall that encircled Calgary's core, built to resist floodwater from storms and melting glaciers. The wall now imprisoned the city's hollow-eyed skyscrapers. Surging oceans, ruinous storms, and crippling droughts had finally sent developed and developing countries into backflips to curb carbon. Oil barons had been chased out of Calgary's plush offices in the 2040s by the world's intolerance for unconventional oil and its untenable footprint of emissions and tar ponds. As Dan strode up McLeod Trail towards Stephen Avenue, he skirted an overturned sedan, half on, half off the sidewalk near the municipal building. A single file of commuters bypassed the derelict car. Most wore dual cartridge dust masks as he did, a line of ants weaving around an obstruction. Unfazed, single-minded. He found comfort in the pad and click of their shoes on pavement, the sound of order and determination. Calgary had become a study in extremes, serene by day and frantically agitated at night. City police couldn't keep up with the chaos caused by rowdy hordes that came out after dark to hurl rocks and insults about uncaring governments. A 9 o'clock curfew had done nothing to quell the violence and destruction. Just that morning, Mayor Vaillancourt announced they couldn't afford to hire more police officers. He declared a state of emergency and said he had appealed to the federal government to deploy Canadian Forces personnel to patrol the downtown core. The mayor said City Council would make sure the light rail transit system kept running, as if the whir of electric arms stroking overhead wires and the hum of sea-train wheels on shiny tracks signaled that Calgary was still a civilized place. Dan pushed his hands further into the pockets of his dress pants. Paper bags, food wrappers, and bits of fluffy pink insulation swirled in windy eddies around his legs as he rounded the corner onto Stephen Avenue. On Olympic Plaza, a man half sang, half shouted through a bullhorn about his Savior, Jesus Christ, who would help them all get back on their feet again. A long queue of ragged men and women snaked through the plaza. They shuffled patiently towards sandwiches and paper cups of water. Bullhorn Man had one hand on a wooden cross with the words "Repent" and "Believe" painted on a crossbar. A banner hung on each side of the serving table. One read, "Jesus is coming back." The other listed the 10 Commandments. As someone with no religious affinity, Dan was curious what motivated the proselytizers to help the downtrodden, charity or conversion. He supposed it wasn't either or, but a complicated marriage of the two. As Dan strode up the mall, he sidestepped islands of broken window glass and homeless people strewn along the sidewalk like monuments to a failed society. Most of the mendicants had signs propped beside them begging for money and bottled water. He imagined himself in their place. Time was ticking down on the 2 months' grace Mrs. Winstead had given him on his rent after his grant money ran out. Outside the Telesat Convention Center, a man sat cross-legged on the sidewalk. The mug he held out contained a few coins. His sign, neatly printed and correctly spelled, read, "Help me get back to business." Dan tossed a quarter in the man's cup. "God bless you, son," the man said, grinning, a gap where his front teeth should have been. Dan looked around. Little separated him or his parents or the people scurrying to work from this man's fate. So, thank you. Thank you. So one of the effects of writing this book was that I fell even more deeply in love with this beautiful province of ours than I already was. And so what I did was I changed the words to a song. I'm not a songwriter, but I changed the words to an existing song. And so this is a bit of a tribute I'd like to share with you about Alberta. And if you catch on to the chorus, Kevin Holowack, then do sing along. You'll recognize the tune. Almost heaven in Alberta, Rocky Mountains, long and winding rivers. Life is old here, older than the trees, younger than the mountains, ringing in the breeze. Prairie roads, take me home to the place I belong in Alberta's rolling foothills. Take me home, prairie roads. All my memories gather round her, waving wheat fields, warm Chinook wind blowing, moonlit evenings, starlight in the sky, misty taste of big rock, wild rose on my mind. Prairie roads, take me home to the place I belong in Alberta's rolling foothills. Take me home, prairie roads. I hear magpies in so much, and thank you for singing along. That just warms my heart. Just the best. Okay, so I just need to get my introduction up here. So, meeting one of our heroes is always amazing. Sitting next to them and sharing an event with them and calling them Tom is a whole other thing. I chose Thomas Wharton's highly acclaimed book, Icefields, for our book club a couple of years ago, and it spawned a rich and nuanced discussion. We enjoyed it so much. Tom is also the acclaimed author of other award-winning books, Salamander, The Logogryph, Every Blade of Grass, as well as a fantasy trilogy for younger readers called The Perilous Realm, and a picture book for children, man of so many talents, called Rutherford the Time-Traveling Moose. He is currently an associate professor, I think this is correct, got this off the website. He is currently an associate professor of writing in English at the University of Alberta in Edmonton and the head of U of A's creative writing program. His most recent project will be released by Random House Canada in the spring of 2023. The Book of Rain, which I have pre-ordered on Audible, and I urge you all to do the same, begins in the northern mining town of River Meadows, where the reality-altering properties of its valuable ghost ore forces the evacuation of the town. This sets in motion a journey through 3 intertwining stories. Can't wait. Without further ado, Tom.
Thanks so much, Doreen. That was a lovely introduction. You got me all in the mood for a sing-along around the campfire with marshmallows. That's what I'd rather do than stand up here and read. But, thanks so much. Something Kevin neglected to mention is that he was a student of mine in several of my creative writing classes.
Yeah. Several.
Yeah. And he survived those and went on to write his first novel. So I think that's quite a feat.
Yes. Started in your class.
Yeah, and that's something to be very proud of. So congratulations. It's strange to be, going around talking about a book that's 27 years old. Is that what we figured out? Yeah, 27. In the time that between when this book first came out in '95 and now, my kids all grew up. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be a grandfather for the first time. So that's looking forward to that. That's very exciting. So a lot happened, in the intervening years, and it was quite an interesting process to come back to this book after all those years when we decided to do when New West Press decided to do the new edition, the landmark edition, to go back and look at the book. That was one of the first things we did. I did with my editor, Samaro Cambarelli, is to just read through the book together and talk about it. And because at the end of the book, we've got an interview, the two of us. She asked me some questions and I answered them. And that interview is partly about that process of looking back on something that you did a long time ago and sort of rethinking it. And one of the things that struck me the most in looking at this book, after many, many years of not looking at it, was, man, the guy who wrote this is just obsessed with glaciers. And it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the book, and I can see that obsession was a huge part of the driving force of creating this thing. Maybe the obsession has waned a bit, but certainly not the fascination with ice and with glaciers. And so what I'd like to do this evening is, rather than reading pieces of narrative in it, what I did was I gathered bits and pieces of it that refer to the ice, that talk about the ice, because one of the things I wanted to do with this book, and that I hope it does, is that a bit of that obsession rubs off on people when they realize the miraculous nature of the ice that gives us our water and our rivers, and how wonderful and strange these huge physical objects are, these glaciers, and how fragile they are, and how Doreen's book kind of imagines a future and not very far in the future when they've dried up, they've gone, and it's kind of hard to imagine what that kind of life would be like. So while they're still here, I do want to read some of the things in the novel that are related to sort of my feelings about ice and about glaciers, which I have taken from my notebooks pretty much verbatim in a lot of cases and given to my characters. All right. Oh, and one other thing I wanted to say is the epigraph that I chose way back when for this book is from Michael Ondaatje, from his novel Coming Through Slaughter. And the line is, "As if everything in the world is the history of ice." And something that I realized coming back to this book all these years later was that, in a way, everything is the history of ice, because it was the receding of the ice sheets and the warming of the world 12,000 years ago or so that allowed humanity to spread and agriculture to start and civilizations to start. So we live in one of these, in between the ice ages sorts of periods. And I find that amazing too, to think about that. Yeah, we really are here in a way thanks to the ice, and we continue to be because of the water that the ice brings us. This book, I should just also mention too, for those who don't know it, takes place in Jasper in the early part of the 20th century. And it involves a doctor from Ireland who is on an expedition to explore the Icefields. And he falls into a crevasse in a glacier, and he sees this strange angelic-looking shape frozen in the ice. Doesn't know what it is, goes back home to the British Isles, but then keeps coming back to Jasper because he's fascinated by what he saw, and he wants to understand what it was. And he begins to learn more and more about glaciers and about the ice as he, his life becomes intertwined with the people who live in this place. Right? So there's some history, there's some actual real history sort of woven through this as well. Anyways, I call this Elegy for the Icefields. I sometimes have the feeling the ice is alive. The high plain of snow and ice from which the glaciers descend cannot be seen from the valley. It must be imagined. Squinting, he picked out the crevasses and ice falls of Arcturus Glacier. From this distance, they seemed only delicate, spidery wrinkles in pale blue silk. Above them gleamed the white rim of the Neve, where the glacier spilled from a gap between the flanking peaks, a slender curve of burning snow. Stones, fragments of a lost continent, lie scattered in the dirty snow of the Till Plain. A shattered pallet at my feet, the mad artist having just stalked away. Gray breccia flecked with acid green and primrose yellow. Pock-marked slabs into which powder of burnt sienna has been ground. The many-colored constellations of lichen, rocks splattered with alizarin crimson and cadmium orange, the purple and white veins of limestone. The enchantment of these mute fragments is undeniable. A moraine is rock debris deposited by the receding ice, a chaotic jumble of fragments from which history must be constructed. There can be little doubt the glacier is at present retreating. The logical next step is to determine as closely as possible the flow rate and the average yearly amount of recession. By doing so, one should be able to predict the approximate time it would take an object embedded at a particular location in the ice to travel to the terminus and melt out. So that's what Byrne is actually hoping is going to happen, is that whatever this thing he saw when he fell in the crevasse will eventually make its way as the ice flows downwards to the terminus, and it will melt out and you'll be able to see it. So. There's another character in the book. His name is Frank Trask, and he's an entrepreneur, I guess you could say. He's started out as a guide, and now he runs the business at the Icefields. So he's the guy who's trying to turn this place, this nascent Jasper Park, into some place to make money, right? So here's one of his ads. Frank Trask's guided walking tours to the Alpine Meadows and the Arcturus Glacier, starting from the chalet lobby at 7:15 a.m. sharp, led by experienced mountaineers who can answer all questions. Please consult beforehand with the management concerning appropriate dress. All other supplies and a luncheon will be provided. We can take you above the clouds at a very reasonable charge and let you touch a real glacier. That's kind of still the promise, right, nowadays. A Nunatak is an island of rock rising above the surrounding ice, upon which one may discover the tenuous presence of life. As I watch, a wide crater-like depression on the glacier slowly fills with water. By early evening, it has become a lake, perfectly transparent, filled with the purest water on earth. There are no fish in its depths, no sedges or grasses along the shore. No geese, no shorebirds gather here at dusk. Each night, as the meltwater lessens, the lake subsides. In the morning, it has vanished again. As the glacier flows forward, its topography will inevitably change, and the lake will vanish. For that reason, its ephemerality, I see no reason to give this body of water a name. It will remain the ideal lake. In certain rare conditions of wind and sunlight, glacial ice evaporates immediately without passing through the liquid stage. This is called sublimation, a more refined form of melting. It's kind of what's happening out there right now, sublimation. That was one of the things I was hoping would happen this evening, is that you could just close your eyes and listen to this icy, cool prose and forget about the heat wave outside. The phenomenon of sublimation is often accompanied by a rhythmic crackling sound, as if invisible feet were stepping across the ice. Glacial ice is not a liquid, nor is it a solid. It flows like lava, like melting wax, like honey, supple glass, fluid stone. To watch it flow, one must be patient. There are few changes that can be seen in the course of one day, but over time crevasses split open and others close. There are ice quakes that shift the terrain, unpredictable geysers of meltwater that carry away aiguilles and other landmarks. And of course, the evidence of flow, acts of delicate, random precision. Shards of rock are plucked by the ice from their strata, carried miles downstream, and left lying with fragments from another geological age. Immense pressure, coupled with extreme cold, combining to produce hitherto unknown effects on matter or upon spirit. The possibility of a spiritual entity trapped, frozen in ice, enmeshed somehow in physical forces, immobilized, and thus rendered physical and solid itself. And when it melted out of the ice, would it just then sublimate back into metaphysical space, leaving human time and scientific measurement behind? The ice field is the source of several major river systems and a storehouse of fresh water. The layers of ice deep within the field may be hundreds of years old, formed from snow that fell here before the discovery of America, before the birth of Shakespeare, before the Industrial Revolution. The ablation zone between the inviolate and the melting zones of a glacier is often sharply defined. Once past this point, the ice begins to die. Its melting can be hastened by even a faint increase in heat at the lower extremity of a glacier, such as produced by the flash bulbs of hundreds of cameras. And I'm going to close with another advertisement from Frank Trask. Jasper's pure glacier water, chipped by hand from the caves of ice, at the heart of Arcturus Glacier in the Canadian Rockies. Water, fresh from the eternal ice to you. Available in plain and aerated varieties. Thank you.
We can actually pull one of these from the front row, actually.
Oh, okay,
But since all the authors are in the front row, so I'll ask these mystery authors to come up here. We'll have a little Q&A. And I'll take Instagram with me. And I will park myself right here for now. Does anyone have a question first before my icebreaker?
You break the ice.
Okay, I'll break the ice. Would you guys like to talk about your writing routine maybe a little bit? Is there a certain place you like to write, a certain time you like to write, maybe something weird that you do to get things going? Maybe we can move. Why don't we move in order of the event? So start with you, Kevin.
A writing routine.
Writing routine.
That implies that it's something you do regularly.
See, that's already something. That's already an answer. So.
I don't have one. I haven't written a book since this one.
Okay, that's fair.
I haven't thought about it.
Okay.
Since the pandemic started, I stopped writing. And
Fair.
I hope someday to start again.
Right.
But a routine, when I was writing this book, the routine came by just being in the flow state, and I couldn't get out of it. So I had maybe a 7 or 8 month span where I had the luxury of devoting a lot of time to it.
Right.
So definitely getting out of the house, writing in a cafe, this stuff is all good.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Nothing fancy.
That sounds like a routine to me, right? So it got you writing, and it did. So, yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Doreen?
Oh, yes, I have a routine as of early July this year.
Okay.
There's nothing hard and fast that I've done or did in the past with Watershed. But now that I'm writing my next novel, I'm trying to be a little more disciplined. And I actually like to start with poetry. I like to start by reading poetry, and it just the spareness of the language and the beauty of the metaphors. I just find that really kind of ignites me, and I'm in awe of poets because I'm not a poet, and so I can't write it. So I'm kind of in awe of them, and I find them very inspiring. So yeah, poetry I'd say is what I do.
That's awesome. Thank you. What about you, Tom?
Coffee, earbuds,
Yeah.
and blasting music, and then I hope and wait for that flow state
Yeah,
to come in.
with enough coffee and
Yeah.
rock and roll.
It eventually comes. Anybody else? Does anybody have a question? Go ahead.
So this one's for Doreen. So I'm just wondering how, in the process of writing your novel, choosing both a subject and a location so close to, I think, all of us, how has it changed your relationship with the city, I'm assuming you're from Calgary, and with water?
Hugely. My awareness of water and the importance of glaciers and the vulnerability and the fragility of our water system has just blown my mind since writing this book and doing all the research for it. I spent a good long time doing research. I really wanted I wanted the premise to be plausible enough, and so I wanted it to be based in a foundation of fact and reasonable probability. So I read a lot of authors, but the one that I went back to more and more was Robert W. Sanford. And I would recommend everybody read him because his scientific writing is so accessible, it's so lyrical, it's so beautiful. But I went back to him again and again because he is an expert in waters, and particularly water scarcity, particularly in the Mountain West. He works with the UN. He's actually the chair of climate and water security for UN University. So that it was very important to me to make sure that I, made it as plausible as possible. But that was 10 years ago, and I worried for a while whether, amazingly enough, whether anybody was going to be interested in this whole climate change thing, right, for a while. And so what's happened in 10 years is astronomical, right, in terms of what we're seeing now, the droughts, the disappearing lakes and rivers in Arizona, and the fires in BC, it's just all piling on. So yeah, it's given me an incredible respect for water and our need to do something to protect it.
Great answer, thank you. And sorry, one last thing. When you walk around the city now, do you see these landscapes that you've created? And can you separate it, or when you see Stephen Avenue, is it this dystopian future.
It's really cool because kind of in your mind's eye as an author, you kind of superimpose, you know, your view of it. But I have to tell you, the section that I read where Daniel's walking through town, I actually did that walk because I really wanted to immerse myself, right? And that scene of the people in Olympic Plaza getting sandwiches and water and the cross, that was actually real. Like I walked by that. You probably are familiar with it. And so I thought, well, this is pretty perfect. So I basically wrote down into that scene what I saw. So, but yeah, definitely you do kind of superimpose your view of things, and it's kind of scary when you imagine the Bow River dry. So yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just have a comment for Thomas. Hi, Thomas.
good.
I just want to tell you, I read this in 1995, and I've never forgotten it. And when I saw you were coming to speak, I was really excited. And we just came down from the Bugaboos.
Oh yeah.
Which I don't know if you've been up there in the Bugaboos, the beautiful glacier up there. Oh my God! And you know what? Your words. I read it a long time ago, so it would have been '94. But when I was looking at the glacier, I was thinking about what all the stuff that you wrote and you've been reading. It is amazing how this has stuck with me.
Well, thank you.
So thank you for writing it, and thank you for launching it again. But it really, and the idea of someone losing all of their work and falling in a crevasse and just going back every year, it was mesmerizing. Just wonderful.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I certainly read a lot of books about the area, and I lived there. Right. When I was a teenager, I lived in Jasper for a few years, and it made a huge impression on me. So I left Jasper. I moved to the city. I went to university, and I wanted to become a writer, so I started writing stuff. And I was like, what's my material, right? I couldn't figure out what it was I had to write about, right? Everything I wrote was sort of copying a writer who I admired, their style or their view of the world or whatever. And it wasn't until I remembered my time in Jasper and all that stuff flooded back into my mind that I realized, yeah, this is my material. This is the thing I have to write about. This is my territory, whatever, right? So that was a big moment, and so I think the book kind of conveys sort of the intensity of my experiences there to some extent.
Okay. Did you also have a question?
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could share with us, all of you, names of writers who inspired you.
This is a bookstore favorite because that means that. Go ahead.
Well, there's one sitting right there. my friend Richard Harrison inspires me in his writing and just a terrific human being. So, yeah. So please, and he's a GG Award winner, Governor General's Award winner. Sitting right there, folks. Probably up here somewhere.
What have you written? What kind of novel have you written? Or poetry, or what title?
Well, the book that he's talking about is called "On Not Losing My Father's Ashes in the Flood," which is about that moment in the flood in 2013 and other. There we go.
Right here.
There we go.
So you're one of those poets I'm in awe of. So for me, there are many, but right at the top of the list, Fred Stenson. I love his books. I love the way he writes about place, and particularly this place. It's just wonderful. Aretha Van Herk is another author I know who worked with Aretha. She's just such an exceptional, legendary writer. So I'd say those two, but there are lots of others.
For this book, I felt I had pretty strong accented style, and it felt necessary to draw influence from people who are interested in formal experimentation, like Thomas Wharton. Icefields was actually very inspiring because it was a book I read that was contemporary and it cared so much about language, and it was okay to read it slowly and to read it multiple times or to at random and find something you like. That was just a very intriguing way of thinking and writing about a book. So things in that vein, I suppose a lot of modernist writing, maybe The Double Hook by Sheila Watson,
That was
right?
Huge influence on Icefields.
Mm.
That book was.
The sparsity of it,
Mhm.
how sort of muscular every line needs to be to make that style work.
Sorry, what was it called?
It's called The Double Hook.
Mm.
I read a lot of Michael Ondaatje as well. He likes variation. For kind of writers who you can just follow as they're exploring a scene, and they don't seem to know what's going on either. It's an approach I appreciate.
I like that. Thank you. I think I saw a question over here. Yes, go ahead.
That was me. Yeah, this is for Kevin. I really appreciated your description of the painterly process, painting implements, materials. So I wonder, are you a painter, or if not, where did you how did you do your research to be able to convey that so well?
I'm not a painter. My brother's a painter. Maybe I just watched him and looked at his things.
Cool.
I would love to be. I think I kind of got it out through this. Like, I don't really need to be if I can, talk about somebody else doing it.
You're a musician, though, right?
Yeah.
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 You've recorded your own music, I think, haven't you?
You can call it music,
You could have done something tonight like I did.
Oh, yeah, maybe next time, now that I know where it's from.
That's right.
I think Richard here has a question.
Yeah, a question. I was really thinking just for Doreen and Kevin, but I think Tom too. As far as I know, the work you're writing, you're exploring values and human relationships, and our relationship with the natural world. But each one of you touches on the spiritual. Each one of you touches on the religious. And I don't think that was the aim of any of these books. But in many ways, fiction is the way in which we explore those things, even without belief. I don't know whether anybody believes here. It doesn't really matter, because the questions raised by religion are right there. And that guy with the sandwiches and the Jesus loves you, apparently he survives another 200 years. So, did you come up with any kind of new angles on your previously held spiritual or religious beliefs as a result of writing them into your fiction?
That's a tough one.
Go ahead. You got the most experience of all of us.
I would say I was trying to figure out what they were by writing that book. Because as I say, I went away from Jasper. I was looking for what it was I wanted to write about, and then all the Icefields and Jasper and all that stuff sort of came back to me in a sort of almost Proustian memory kind of thing, right? Where I forgot about that, and I forgot about that, and then I realized that this place it really did have a spiritual meaning for me, and it wasn't inside any organized religion or anything like that. It's just the way it made me, the way those landscapes make me feel. They make me feel like reaching for something more, right, than the mundane or the ordinary or whatever. And so I guess I was just kind of intuitively trying to write what that feeling was. And I guess I would call it spiritual. I don't know. To me, spiritual is really grounded in things, right? It's not about invisible stuff. It's the feeling and the experience that you have in the real world, right? And it just feels like it's much easier to feel that in natural settings, and for me at least, especially grand natural settings, mountains, glaciers, and all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
What he said. It definitely plays in my book, but you're right. It isn't like a main theme or topic of discussion, or it's not an area I reach any conclusions about necessarily in the book. But I really felt compelled to include it, partly because it's Alberta. There's a lot of people with very strong spiritual and religious beliefs here, and I thought, I didn't really want to tell a story about this place without touching on that. Whether it changed my own views, not really. I used to be Catholic a long time ago. No longer. No, left that behind. The most religious experience I ever had was when I climbed Merlin Ridge near Skokie Lodge.
Mm-hmm.
And like truly that was just overwhelmingly beautiful and amazing. It was so sublime. That to me, so I kind of echo Tom in that way. That is what spirituality is to me, that connection to earth. And I think that connection to place is also such an important part of us protecting it. Like each of us feeling that connection to place, feeling the amazement in the wonder that what those places can bring us, that's what will allow us to make the difficult changes that are needed. Even if you're talking about something as big and fraught as, leaving oil and gas behind, reducing our reliance on that, like that connection to place is what's going to allow us to have a future. So.
The question was about what, like how spirituality factors into our.
Well, how exploring it through
Yeah.
your work.
Okay.
What did that become something for you that maybe unexpectedly a refinement or rejection and a realization of what your opinions were or your beliefs were in that realm?
I think I agree with something Tom said, where spirituality is somehow embedded within things, and as I go about, it seems to be there's like a work required to pull it out of the things, and that's a bit of what description can do in the novel, I think. So if you're kind of hanging out with the feeling, but narrative, I guess, because you're always pushing along, the characters are never finding an answer. You're always moving to the next sort of piece of description.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more. Does anybody else have a question? Let's see.
I do.
You can do it.
I'm just curious, all of your novels are very descriptive, like you're really right in there with the characters and with the place and everything. I wonder, do you do journals when you're when you're walking down through Olympic Plaza and you see that guy, you know him, but you create this world and this place for us. I just wonder, do you jot that down, or when you're writing, does it come to you, or like how do you remember and put that all in? If that's
Well, definitely, yeah. I mean, I always carry a journal around and write down stuff that I see. I definitely did that with Icefields. Just spending many days clambering around the moraines and just trying to feel the place with every sense and then write what those experiences are like. And and you come back and you sit down and you start to write, and if you can't remember a detail, you make it up, right? That's part of the fiction writing process too, right? It's kind of a constant interplay between something that you dream up and something that's grounded in your own experience, memory, and in real things. At least for me.
For me, it's very visceral, more than walking around and taking notes. I just immerse myself. I actually took a exploratory trip through southern Alberta to all the places that I talk about, the task force going to in the book. I wanted to go to all those little towns and just get a feel for what they were like, and that was amazing. Like, small towns in Alberta are just the most wonderful places. So that, and then at the end, then I'd write some notes. But I do really like to experience the place, just like we all do when we go somewhere, right? We just want to experience it. Yeah.
It wakes the mind up, right?
Yeah.
Going to different places, getting out of here. We were talking about routine earlier, right? So routine is part of the writer's life, but another part of it is getting out of that routine every once in a while and waking your brain up by going to other places and having these experiences that you can then take back with you. So,
Yeah, I remember seeing an interview with somebody, I can't remember who had written an award-winning novel, and she was asked, what kind of research do you do to make this possible? She's like, I don't like research, it's boring. So, and then I started to think like, well, maybe research is boring, going out and looking at things, learning new details is boring if that's not what you want to be doing. But I think as a novelist or as a writer, I think just living your life is the kind of research, and then you pick up things, and then the novel becomes your journal, I guess, to sort of process them that way. Yeah, I never kept a journal, and I never have. I don't know
very. I'm jealous of people who are able to maintain something like that. But the novel kind of became the space to pull things from my past and put them in. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't even like to call it research because it's much more free form than what we think of as academic research, for example, right? Because I might go somewhere online, let's say, to find out a particular fact, and then next thing I know, I've traveled on to something completely unrelated, but I might find something I can bring back with me, you know, on that random, you know, kind of, and that makes it not boring. Because I never know exactly where I'm going to end up.
Yeah, you kind of want to get into a fun conversation with somebody because maybe they'll say a line that like,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, all three of you, for your readings and for that conversation. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for the questions.